Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a literally high-wire geopolitical juggling act. We are looking at Pakistan, a nation positioned right at the busy intersection of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, and how it's essentially built its entire modern survival strategy on playing global superpowers against one another. To really understand how this works, we're going to trace a fascinating timeline, mapping out exactly how, and more importantly why, Pakistan's alliances have shifted so dramatically over the last 15 years.
So let's dive right into defining the core strategy at play here. It's called a multi-vector balancing act. Basically, instead of just picking a side and sticking with it, say strictly aligning with the West or the East, Islamabad actively leverages its strategic geography to balance relationships with China, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, all at the exact same time. They're extracting security hardware, financial bailouts, and diplomatic cover from all sides, without ever fully committing to a single faction.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. The Geopolitical Balancing Act, 2. The Pivot to China, 3. Transactional Ties and Bailouts, 4. The Gulf Security Rift, and 5. The 2026 Geopolitical Crucible.
Starting off with Section 1, the Geopolitical Balancing Act, the weight of survival. Now check out this staggering number, $100 billion. That is Pakistan's total external debt. And honestly, it acts as the primary engine for their constantly shifting alliances. They literally always need liquidity and bailouts just to stave off a sovereign default. This massive financial vulnerability forces them to treat their foreign policy as a series of highly transactional relationships. They simply cannot afford to alienate anyone who holds the checkbook.
Moving into our second phase, the Pivot to China, Managed Dependency, covering 2011 to 2015. Looking at this timeline, you can see exactly what triggered Pakistan's heavy pivot toward Beijing. Back in May 2011, the U.S. raid in Abbottabad to capture Osama bin Laden deeply strained U.S.-Pakistan ties. Then, just a few months later, the Salalah border incident, where a NATO strike actually hit Pakistani border posts, caused a severe fracture. Islamabad quickly realized that relying entirely on the U.S. was just way too volatile. So they rapidly accelerated a strategic pivot to Beijing, which culminated in April 2015 with the launch of the massive $62 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor, cementing an entirely new era of dependency.
To really grasp the root physical cause of this continuous financial dependency, consider this ratio. You're looking at a 100-to-1 cost difference between firing advanced defensive interceptors versus deploying low-cost strike drones. I mean, prolonged conventional defense is structurally and financially ruinous. Because Pakistan simply cannot outspend its regional rivals, it now relies on China for 70 to 80% of its defense imports. And because of that, China now holds roughly one-third of Pakistan's massive external debt, locking Islamabad into what is effectively a managed dependency.
All right, on to Section 3, Transactional Ties and Bailouts, 2022 to 2025.
So the crucial takeaway here is how Pakistan leverages whatever military assets it does have to survive economically. Between the summer of 2022 and the spring of 2023, facing an imminent balance of payments crisis, Pakistan covertly supplied $900 million in artillery munitions to Ukraine, and this was all facilitated by a U.S.-based defense contractor. In exchange for this massive secret arms transfer, the U.S. cleared the payments and briefed the IMF, leading directly to a critical $3 billion bailout in June 2023. They essentially traded defense manufacturing output for immediate Western financial rescue.
And you know, the IMF conditions actually formalized this whole multi-vector reality. $12.5 billion. That's the combined amount in mandatory deposits that China, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are actually required to maintain in Pakistan's central bank until September 2027 under IMF rules. This isn't just a dry economic metric. It physically locks in Islamabad's reliance on 3 completely separate and sometimes competing creditors all at the exact same time.
But here's the catch. Even with those deeply entrenched ties to China, Rawalpindi still has to keep the U.S. invested. So they maintain this highly transactional security relationship. In late 2025 and 2026, they held counterterrorism dialogues targeting mutual threats like ISIS-K and the TTP, and even ran joint urban warfare exercises dubbed Inspired Gambit 2026. They're basically offering niche counterterrorism services to secure their ongoing relevance to Washington, ensuring that the diplomatic channels and, of course, the financial pipelines stay open.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Gulf Security Rift, from 2025 to 2026.
Now, our timeline takes a pretty dramatic turn.
In September 2025, Pakistan signs a major defense pact with Saudi Arabia, but this immediately alienates the UAE, who basically view it as a defection amid their own ongoing rivalry with the Saudis. By April 2026, the UAE retaliates financially, straight up refusing to roll over their debt. Pakistan's reserves completely plunge, forcing Saudi Arabia to step in mid-April, rapidly intervening with a fresh $3 billion deposit just to prevent an IMF default.
Let's zoom in on what actually triggered that fallout. This quote is straight from the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. It's effectively a collective security arrangement. And get this, confidential clauses even provided for the deployment of up to 80,000 Pakistani troops to secure Saudi borders. To Abu Dhabi, this exclusive military entanglement totally crossed the line.
And this whole cycle perfectly exposes just how fragile this balancing act really is. Think about it. Pakistan makes a security choice with Saudi Arabia, and boom, it instantly becomes a financial crisis with the UAE. Abu Dhabi demanded its $3.5 billion back immediately. Pakistan had to pay it, draining their reserves to completely dangerous levels. It took another ally, Saudi Arabia, depositing $3 billion just a few weeks later to save him. It's like a perpetual cycle of patching one leak by drilling another hole.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the 2026 Geopolitical Crucible.
This is where our timeline really hits its peak. In February 2026, the devastating U.S.-Israeli war on Iran breaks out, which totally paralyzes global oil markets. Pakistan immediately sees the opportunity to prove its relevance, stepping right in as a mediator. By April, they actually managed to broker a temporary truce and host historic in-person talks between the U.S. and Iran at the Serena Hotel in Islamabad. However, the talks ultimately collapse, leading to immense pressure in May for Pakistan to formally pick a side once and for all.
But behind closed doors, there was a completely different story unfolding. While they were publicly projecting themselves as responsible, neutral peace mediators hosting these historic talks, U.S. intelligence exposed a major covert reality. During the ceasefire, Pakistan was secretly allowing Iranian military transport aircraft, specifically RC-130s, to shelter at their Norcon airbase to hide them from American and Israeli airstrikes. They were playing a massive double game, securing Western bailouts while covertly protecting Iranian assets, simply because they viewed Iran as an indispensable security buffer.
Once this double game got exposed, an understandably frustrated U.S. administration, led by President Donald Trump, explicitly demanded that Pakistan sign the Abraham Accords and formally recognize Israel. But check out this data to see why that was literally impossible. With only 2% of the Pakistani public supporting the Accords and a massive 91% deeply sympathizing with Gaza, normalization wasn't just unpopular. It would have triggered immediate, catastrophic domestic political collapse for the civilian government.
It turns out the balancing act does have physical limits. Despite intense financial vulnerability, $100 billion in debt, and threats of severe repercussions from U.S. senators, domestic constraints ultimately forced Pakistan to draw a hard line. On May 26, 2026, Defense Minister Khawaja Asif formally rejected the U.S. demand, citing fundamental ideologies. They simply could not trade their own domestic survival for foreign appeasement in this specific instance.
So as we reflect on this incredible 15-year timeline, this wild juggling act of staggering debt, covert munitions deals, shifting military pacts, and playing superpowers against one another, it leaves us with one profound question. Can a nation genuinely survive in the long term by being a transactional ally to everyone, but fundamentally loyal to no one? It's a geopolitical tightrope walk, and as the events of 2026 proved, the wind is only blowing harder. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope mapping out these alliances helped unpack the realities behind the headlines. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.